My name is Sydney Tanner. I am 25 years old. The night my family tried to talk me out of my new last name, we were crammed around my parents' dining table in Portland, Oregon, and my dad had just slammed his palm beside my plate hard enough to rattle the glasses. My older sister Amber glared at me like I had personally set fire to her shop. My mom kept patting a stack of printed screenshots as if she could smooth the truth out of them, and every eye at that table was on me, like I was the one who had betrayed them. "You humiliated us," my dad said, voice low and tight. "You ruined your sister's reputation and, for what a ceremony." I looked at the people who had skipped my doctoral hooding to host a launch dinner for Amber's lifestyle store and thought for the thousandth time that the only thing I'd really ruined was the story they liked to tell about themselves. Before I explain how we got to that table and why I walked away from it for good, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever sat through a family dinner where you realized you were done playing the quiet, grateful child. Honestly, that was the night I realized I was more done than I had ever admitted to myself. Sitting there in my parents' house, smelling my mom's overcooked salmon and the fancy candles Amber sells at her store, I kept looping back to one day almost a year before, that the day they decided my milestone was optional. I'm the younger daughter, the one who took the city bus across town for classes and worked overnight shifts, while Amber posted pretty photos of her renovation projects that my parents practically financed. When I finally earned my doctorate in physical therapy from a university here in Portland, I honestly believed that hearing Dr. Sydney Tanner over a microphone would be the moment my parents finally saw me as more than a built-in babysitter and emergency backup. I thought being the first doctor in our family would mean more than a curated ribbon cutting at Amber's new store. Instead, the morning of my hooding ceremony turned into the clearest proof I was wrong, and it started with a phone call that made everything inside me go very still in a way I couldn't undo later, because once you hear where you fall on your family's priority list, you cannot unhear it. Graduation morning, I woke up before my alarm in my little one-bedroom apartment in Southeast Portland, half convinced I'd overslept and missed everything. After years of grinding through prerequisites, clinical rotations, and weekend shifts at a rehab center, my brain had learned to wake up in crisis mode. Sunlight pushed through the cheap blinds, catching on the black gown I'd steamed the night before, and hung on the closet door like a promise. For a few sweet seconds, I let myself imagine the scene I'd carried in my head all those years. My mom in the front row dabbing her eyes. My dad craning over people to take pictures that cut off the top of my cap. Amber pretending to be bored, while secretly texting her friends about how her little sister was a doctor now. That fantasy was the fuel that got me through too many nights at the campus library and too many mornings when my alarm felt like an insult. I showered, did my makeup with hands that kept shaking, pulled on the gown, and pinned my cap, telling myself that whatever came after this, at least I would have this one day with them there. I was practicing my smile in the bathroom mirror, trying to see myself the way I hoped they'd finally see me when my phone buzzed on the counter. "Mom," the screen said, and relief rushed through me so fast I picked up mid-ring. "Hey," I said, already picturing them stuck in traffic on I-5. "Are you guys on your way? If you leave now, parking won't be awful." My mom's voice cut across mine, unnaturally bright. "Sweetie, listen," she said, like she was canceling coffee, not a once-in-a-lifetime ceremony. "We messed up the date. Amber's launch dinner is tonight. Remember? We already booked the caterer, the photographer, the influencers. Your dad is doing the wine pours. We can't just bail." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. "You're not coming," I said slowly to my doctorate hooding. There was a pause then, that familiar sigh that always meant I was about to be told I was overreacting. "We'll celebrate later," she said. "We'll get dressed up, go out, take pictures with your diploma. It's basically the same thing, and this dinner is really important for Amber's brand." I was still processing that when my dad's voice came through, closer and rougher, like he'd taken the phone out of her hand. "Sydney," he said, "don't start. We're proud of you. Okay? We really are." But it's just a ceremony. They say your name, everyone claps. You walk across a stage. It's over. Amber's dinner is a huge deal for her business. There are local magazine people coming, brand reps, a blogger with 500,000 followers. We can't just leave her hanging. I stared at my reflection cap tilted just so and heard myself say, "If you're proud of me, you'd be sitting in those seats." He made a frustrated sound I knew too well. "You know how much money and time we've put into helping your sister get that space ready," he said. "We promised we'd be here, and it's not like you're alone. Your classmates will be there. Don't be dramatic, Sid. We'll take you to dinner next week." The sentence landed like a bruise on top of every time they'd said it before, the catch-all phrase they used whenever my hurt was inconvenient or threatened to interrupt Amber's spotlight. When I hung up, the apartment felt as quiet as the rehab gym after closing, all the motion sucked out. For a moment, I actually considered taking off the gown, crawling back into bed, and letting the day slide past like it was just another random Thursday in Portland, where people went to work and stopped for coffee, and nobody became anything new. Then a worse picture formed, my parents telling anyone who asked that I'd decided not to walk, that I'd gotten overwhelmed or too emotional, that they would have gone if only I hadn't been so sensitive. The idea of them spinning that story lit something cold and sharp in my chest. I grabbed my keys, forced myself out the door, and drove across the bridges toward campus, stuck behind minivans with hand-painted congrats grad messages on the back windows. In the parking garage, families spilled out of their cars carrying flowers and noisy little cousins, and I walked alone, careful not to stare too long at anyone else's joy or at the way parents automatically reached for their kids' shoulders in the crowd. Inside the hall, the noise hit me like a wall, the pep band playing some upbeat song, babies, crying, people shouting names across the rows as they tried to wave down their kids in caps and gowns. I found my assigned seat in the section reserved for doctoral candidates and sat down between two empty chairs with little reserved placards taped to the backs, the ones I'd requested for my parents weeks ago when I still believed in that front row fantasy. I could have pulled the signs off and pretended they were just extra spots, but I left them there like tiny gravestones for a version of my family that didn't exist. When the dean told us to stand and turn around to wave at our families, a sea of hands and phones rose up. I turned with everyone else and stared straight at the section where my parents were supposed to be, picturing my mom's face, my dad's proud grin. Instead, I saw a middle-aged couple arguing over a camera, a little boy picking his nose, a woman in a denim jacket scrolling her phone. Nobody who belonged to me. Halfway through the ceremony, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew I shouldn't look, but during a lull, I slid it out and checked the screen. Amber had posted a photo to the family group chat from her store's grand opening dinner, long farmhouse tables lit by Edison bulbs, a perfectly styled wall of candles and vases. My parents standing in the background in coordinating outfits, my dad already wearing the branded apron Amber had made for him. The caption said, "Wish you were here," with a laughing emoji and a clinking glasses gif that made my stomach turn. The timestamp on the message matched the moment my row had just been told to line up to walk. When they finally called my name, Dr. Sydney Tanner, I stepped into the lights, managed a smile that felt like it had been stapled on, shook hands, took the diploma cover, and tried not to imagine the empty camera shot when the videographer panned across the audience looking for my cheering section. The applause sounded huge, but none of it felt like it had anything to do with me or with the work I had dragged myself through to earn that title. Afterwards, the courtyard outside the hall filled with clusters of families clutching bouquets and balloons, everyone wrapping their arms around their graduates as if they'd just come back from war. I stepped off to the side with my diploma case tucked against my chest, pretending to scroll my phone so I wouldn't look like the one kid nobody came for. My classmates were swallowed up in hugs and photos, their parents arguing good-naturedly about where to go for dinner. A couple of professors stopped to congratulate me, asked if my parents were around, and I lied with a practiced shrug about them getting stuck at Amber's event. As soon as I got home, I propped my phone on a stack of textbooks, set the timer, and took my own graduation pictures in front of the living room wall. No flowers, no banner, just me in my gown eyes, a little too shiny. That night, I posted one of the photos with a simple caption: First doctor in the family. My parents had a prior commitment. I didn't tag anyone, but I knew exactly who I wanted to see it, and I knew they would never admit what that caption really meant. The comments from friends and classmates rolled in fast heart emojis, proud messages, stupid inside jokes from late night study sessions. The names I kept searching for never popped up. Instead, the family group chat lit with Amber's photos from the dinner, my mom's captions about how proud she was of her entrepreneur daughter and how much fun they were having hosting Portland's creative community. I finally typed, "Today I became Dr. Sydney Tanner. You chose a store party over being there." I won't forget that. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared 3 times before my mom answered. "We told you we'd celebrate later," she wrote. "Your father and I worked hard to help Amber get this place open. Why are you making this into drama?" My dad followed with a voice message I didn't even have to play. To know the tone, irritated, patronizing, ending with some version of, "Don't be dramatic." I sat on my living room floor, gown puddled around me, and cried in a way that scraped my throat raw, because every skipped award ceremony, every time they left early to get to one of Amber's events, crashed down on me at once. Eventually, the sobs burned out, leaving only a strange, steady clarity. If they could skip this, they could skip anything, and I realized I'd treated their attention like an exam I could eventually ace if I just kept performing. The problem wasn't my score. The test was rigged. I opened my laptop and typed "legal name change Oregon" into the search bar just to see. The steps were surprisingly simple: file a petition, pay a fee, show up in court, publish a tiny notice in a local paper. I sat there imagining what it would feel like to sign a name that didn't drag all this history behind it. For a moment, I thought about using my grandmother's name, because my grandma Joyce was the only one who had ever mailed me $20 bills with notes that said, "I'm proud of you. Keep going." But the more I stared at the form, the more I realized I wanted a name that wasn't tied to any of them at all. One that came from someone who had actually chosen me in the present, not just in old memories that nobody else seemed to value. That someone turned out to be my downstairs neighbor, Hazel Page, a retired nurse who baked too many brownies and had an open door policy for anyone in the building who needed to talk. Hazel had been slipping encouragements my way for years, leaving sticky notes on my door during finals week and knocking with leftover soup when she knew I was working doubles. The night after graduation, when she heard me crying through the thin apartment walls, she knocked until I opened the door with swollen eyes. She didn't pretend not to notice the gown thrown over a chair or the stack of unused congrats cards I'd bought for my parents. She just stepped inside, handed me a mug of tea, and said, "All right, kiddo, tell me what they did this time." I poured it all out: the skipped ceremony, the photos from the launch dinner, the group chat. When I mentioned the name change search, she nodded slowly and told me how she'd once dropped her ex-husband's last name after he cheated, said how claiming Paige had felt like walking out of a burning house and closing the door for good. By the time Hazel left that night, there was a new idea forming between us. "You know," she said, rinsing her mug in my sink like she'd done it 1,000 times, "last names aren't blood oaths. They're labels. You can pick the one that fits who actually shows up for you." She squeezed my shoulder. "If you ever wanted mine, I'd be honored. God knows my own son doesn't appreciate it." We both laughed, but something in my chest settled like a puzzle piece dropping into place. The next morning, I printed out the petition and wrote Sydney Page in the blank space for new name my hand, shaking at first, then steadying. At the courthouse downtown, the clerk stamped my paperwork without even looking up long enough to see the storm passing behind my eyes. On the way home, I stopped at the post office and mailed certified letters to my parents and to Amber. Effective on this date, I would be known as Dr. Sydney Page, and they should update their records accordingly. No apology, no explanation. Just the facts, because they had never cared about the feelings behind them anyway. They did care about appearances, though, and I learned exactly how much later that week, when my phone lit with my sister's name. "What the hell are you doing?" Amber demanded as soon as I answered. "Mom's losing it. Dad says you're trying to embarrass us publicly. You're changing your name over one scheduling conflict." I stared at the photo still pinned in the family chat, my parents grinning under Amber's shop logo during my ceremony. "I'm not doing this over one night," I said. "I'm doing it over a lifetime of being the afterthought." She scoffed so loudly I had to pull the phone away. "You're so ungrateful," she snapped. "They paid for your car, your classes." They hadn't, not really. They'd co-signed a used hatchback and helped with rent once when my hours got cut. Most of my tuition was scholarships, loans, and those overnight shifts. "Enjoy your party," I said, cutting her off. "And get used to introducing yourself as Amber, the woman whose parents skipped their doctor daughter's graduation for a product launch." I hung up before she could answer and let the silence of my phone feel like the first boundary I hadn't immediately apologized for. Once the paperwork was in motion, it was like the name my parents used when they were frustrated with me went on life support. I started signing Sydney Page on emails where I could get away with it, introducing myself that way at networking events, testing how the syllables sat in my mouth. At the same time, I knew a new name wasn't enough if I kept living 10 minutes from the house where I'd been trained to shrink. So I applied for jobs all over Portland, looking for a clinic that didn't know me as Glenn and Gail's younger daughter, but as a physical therapist who had worked herself half to death to get here. A community health center on the east side called back, offering me an entry-level position with heavy caseloads and not great pay, but a ton of autonomy. The director, a brisk woman named Marina Kirby, warned me over Zoom that many of their patients came from complicated families and tough neighborhoods. "It's not glamorous," she said. "You'll hear a lot of stories that sound like they should never happen to kids." I almost laughed with relief. "I can handle that," I told her. "Trust me." Starting over at the clinic felt like stepping into a life that actually fit the name on my badge. On my first day as Dr. Page, I met a fellow therapist named Nina Nash, a whip-smart woman with pink-streaked hair who had zero patience for parents who treated their kids' pain like an inconvenience. We spent long days working side by side in the treatment gym and in cramped evaluation rooms helping injured warehouse workers and high school athletes relearn how to move without wincing. One evening, after a particularly rough consult with a teenager whose mother dismissed her chronic pain as attention-seeking Nina, and I sat on the curb behind the clinic sharing vending machine pretzels. "You ever notice how many of our patients' problems start with someone not being believed?" she asked. Something in me unnodded because it was the first time since the graduation that I said it out loud to someone who wasn't Hazel. I told Nina the short version, my family skipping my ceremony. The name changed the constant accusations of being dramatic. She shook her head, swore under her breath, and said, "You know that's a revenge origin story, right? The only question is what you do with it." Nina's words bounced around in my head later that night as I sat at my kitchen table, a stack of half-finished patient notes on one side and my laptop on the other. Hazel had gone to bed hours ago after reminding me I still had a key to her place if I needed to talk. Instead, I opened a blank page on a blogging platform and typed Dr. S into the username box, choosing just an initial to protect my job. I started writing about families who minimize about golden children and invisible siblings, about the way "don't be dramatic" can become a catchphrase to shut down any accountability. When I finally wrote about the hooding ceremony, I changed the city, the timing, the exact business details, but I left the core intact: parents skipping their daughter's graduation to pour drinks at a sibling's launch dinner. I ended with a line that had been pounding in my chest since that night. "Some people are more upset that you're telling the story than that the story is true." I hit publish with my heart in my mouth and then shoved the laptop away like it might explode. At first, almost nothing happened. A few hits trickled in from late-night searches like "parents skipped graduation for sibling" and "am I overreacting to family neglect?" A handful of anonymous comments appeared from people who sounded like they were typing with shaking hands. This is my life, one wrote. I thought I was just being sensitive. Nina found the blog after I slipped and mentioned it over coffee one morning, and instead of lecturing me about professional boundaries, she grinned. This is good, she said. You're not naming anyone. You're just telling the truth. Let me send this to a friend who works for a local mental health site. Within a week, that friend had republished one of my posts with my permission as an anonymous essay by Dr. S.A., practicing clinician in Portland. Then a bigger West Coast culture magazine picked up an excerpt for a piece on toxic families, and suddenly my quiet revenge project wasn't so quiet. Views spiked, emails poured in from strangers, and in small pockets of the internet, my story stopped being a shameful secret and became a signal flare, instead, something people passed to one another like a flashlight in a dark room. It didn't take long for that signal to reach the people I'd written about, even disguised. One Thursday afternoon, about 9 months after graduation, my phone started vibrating nonstop between patients with calls from a number I hadn't saved under any name. When I finally checked, there were 3 voicemails from my mom and a string of texts that shifted from wounded to furious in the space of a few hours. In the first message, her voice was high and tight. Sydney, if this is still your number, I think that article someone sent me is about us. People are talking. Your sister says a podcast mentioned a Portland decor shop whose owners skipped their daughter's graduation. Her sponsors are nervous. Is that what you wanted? The second voicemail was sharper, accusing me of airing private family business and exaggerating one misunderstanding into abuse. The texts that followed got more desperate as Amber lost a collaboration with a big local brand and a home tour feature. We are desperate, my mom finally wrote. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we hurt you. Just panic because the image they'd curated was finally cracking in front of the very people they'd always wanted to impress. I let the messages sit for a few days while I turned them over like sharp stones, asking myself whether any of it sounded like remorse or if it was just fear of consequences. When I played the voicemails for Hazel at her kitchen table, she snorted softly. They're upset because you put a mirror up, not because of what they see in it, she said. At the clinic, I let Nina listen between appointments, and she shook her head. If someone only calls because your silence starts costing them money, that's not reconciliation, that's damage control. A week later, my mom sent one more text. Your father says we all need to sit down and talk about this. Like a family. Sunday dinner. Please. I stared at the date, at the word family, and thought about that hall full of cheering parents, about the empty chairs with the reserve signs, about my own name printed wrong on the tentative program until I corrected it myself. I typed, I'll come if we meet at your house. And everyone agrees there will be no yelling, no rewriting history, and no calling me dramatic. If that happens, I walk. My mom replied almost instantly, Of course. We just want to fix this. Which is how I ended up back at that dining table in their suburban Portland Craftsman, the one that had hosted years of birthdays, where Amber's cake was front and center, and mine was squeezed onto the edge of the buffet. Amber and her husband Sean sat shoulder to shoulder, both in neutral tones that made them look like a lifestyle spread from her store's social page, while my parents took their usual spots at either end, like they were presiding over something more important than a family discussion. Hazel had insisted on driving me over and waited in her car down the block just in case I needed to bail. You have a ride either way, she'd said. Before we even finished passing the salad, my dad launched into a speech about loyalty and reputation, about how our dirty laundry was now all over the internet. My mom dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin and talked about neighbors whispering at church about how Amber had lost a lucrative staging contract after the article went around their industry group. At no point did either of them mention the word sorry without attaching the phrase "you felt that way afterward," like bubble wrap. When my dad finally slammed his hand on the table, it was because I slid my phone across the wood with the family group chat from graduation night open. There was my message about becoming Dr. Tanner while they poured drinks at Amber's store, instead of sitting in 2 reserved chairs, My mom's reply calling it drama, and my dad's line about it being just a ceremony. This is what I wrote about, I said. I did not invent anything. I described what happened. You are more upset that other people know than that you did it. Amber leaned forward. You cost me real money, she snapped. Sponsors dropped me. A feature vanished, and mom and dad had to pull from their retirement to cover the shop loan. Do you feel proud of that? I thought of every time she shrugged when they left my events early. No, I said. I feel sad it took you losing money to notice I exist. I pulled a manila envelope from my bag and laid the court order and my updated license on top of the phone. And for the record, it is Dr. Page now. You do not get to use the name you ignored to drag me back. My dad's mouth twisted. You will regret this, he said. Maybe I answered standing, but I already regret every year I spent begging for scraps of attention from people who could not bother to sit in a chair and clap. From tonight on, we are biologically related strangers. I walked out to where Hazel was parked and let her drive me home while my phone buzzed with messages I never opened. In the months that followed, Amber's shop limped along as collaborations faded. My parents quietly sold their lake cabin to steady the loan, and I kept what mattered: my work, my peace, and a name tied to someone who actually showed up. I do not forgive them, and I will not go back. Thank you for hearing mine. If you were sitting in my chair that night, would you have stayed at that table or walked out into the Portland dark with me?